My husband said, I need a gap year from being married. I smiled and replied, take a lifetime. 5 days later, he called me from the airport begging for help. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 38 years old, and the night my marriage ended started so normally that, if someone had told me how it would end, I would have laughed in their face. It was a Thursday evening. Ryan and I were sitting at our kitchen table eating takeout Thai food. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the smell of curry filled the room. We weren't fighting. We weren't going through counseling. There hadn't been some dramatic betrayal or explosive argument. At least not yet. Ryan kept pushing food around his plate without actually eating. A few times I caught him staring into space like he was rehearsing something in his head. Eventually, he set down his fork, took a deep breath, and looked at me with the kind of expression people wear when they're about to deliver bad news. Claire, I've been doing a lot of soul-searching lately. I glanced up from my food. Okay. He rubbed his palms together nervously. I feel like I've lost myself in this marriage. The sentence felt strange the moment it left his mouth, not because people never struggle in marriage, but because it sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. We've been married 8 years, Ryan, I said. Where is this coming from? His eyes dropped to the table. I've been talking to someone. My stomach tightened immediately. What do you mean, talking to someone? It's not what you think. That answer didn't help. In fact, it made things worse. Then tell me. He hesitated before finally saying, my life coach. I stared at him. Your what? My life coach. For a second, I genuinely thought he was joking. He wasn't. I started seeing her about 3 months ago. He'd been meeting with her for 3 months and somehow never thought to mention it to his wife. You've had a life coach for 3 months and never told me? Ryan sighed. I knew you'd react like this. I wasn't even sure what that meant. Most people would probably have questions if they discovered their spouse had been secretly discussing their life with a stranger for an entire season. What exactly has this life coach helped you realize? Ryan sat a little straighter. She's helped me understand that I've spent too much of my life living for other people. The answer came out smoothly, almost word for word, like he'd repeated it before. I set my fork down. And? I need space to grow. A small knot formed in my stomach. What kind of space? Ryan took another breath. Then he finally said it. I need a gap year from being married. I blinked. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. A what? A gap year. He actually looked relieved after saying it, as though getting the words out had been the hardest part. I need time to travel, to experience things, to figure out who I am outside of this relationship. I kept staring at him. Ryan mistook my silence for interest and continued. I'm thinking Europe first, maybe Greece, Italy, Spain, then Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Nepal. The list kept going, country after country, destination after destination. And as he talked, something became painfully clear. The longer he talked, the clearer it became that he wasn't asking for my opinion. He was simply informing me of a decision he'd already made. You've planned all of this. He nodded. Pretty much. How long? A year. I let out a short laugh and shook my head. A year. I know it sounds unconventional. That was one way to describe it. Another word would have been absurd. Ryan leaned forward. I still love you, Claire. I almost laughed again. I just need time to become a more complete version of myself. What exactly happens while you're becoming this more complete version of yourself? His answer came immediately. We stay married. I stared at him. We stay married? Of course. Ryan looked genuinely confused by my reaction. I travel for a year. You stay here. We keep our relationship. When I come back, we'll be stronger. I waited for him to realize how ridiculous that sounded. He never did. And what am I supposed to do while you're traveling around the world? Ryan shrugged. Live your life, work on yourself, support my journey. Support my journey. The phrase floated across the table and landed somewhere between insulting and unbelievable. Then he added the part that explained everything. I've already researched flights. Of course he had. When are you leaving? Tuesday. I looked at him. This Tuesday? Yeah. 5 days from now? He nodded. I wanted to do it before I lost my nerve. I rubbed my forehead. The problem wasn't that Ryan had a plan. The problem was that he'd built an entire future without me and somehow expected me to smile and applaud when he announced it. Then another question occurred to me, an important one. How are you paying for all this? Ryan hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. We're married. That wasn't an answer. Our finances are shared. Still not an answer. I figured I'd use our cards. There it was. The missing piece. The trip. The flights. The hostels. The year abroad. The self-discovery tour. All funded by me. The cards weren't joint accounts. Ryan was simply an authorized user on cards that belonged to me. a detail that suddenly seemed very important. My cards. Our cards. My cards. Ryan rolled his eyes. That's semantics. I looked at him for several seconds, long enough to notice how certain he was, long enough to realize he genuinely believed this conversation would end differently. He thought I'd negotiate, argue, cry, maybe even beg him to stay. What never crossed his mind was that I might simply accept what he was saying. A strange calm settled over me, the kind that arrives when a decision has already been made. I pushed my chair back and stood. Ryan smiled immediately. You understand? Oh, I understand perfectly. Relief flooded his face. Really? Absolutely. His shoulders relaxed. For the first time all evening, he looked happy. Then I said the one thing he wasn't expecting. You should take the trip. His smile widened. Thank you. I nodded. Take a lifetime. The smile disappeared. What? You heard me. His expression changed so quickly it almost gave me whiplash. Claire, you want complete independence? You can have it. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. Ryan stood up so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. What are you doing? I found Jennifer's number. My attorney. Then I pressed call. His face went pale. Claire, stop. I waited for voicemail and spoke calmly. Jennifer, it's Claire Bennett. I need to file for divorce immediately. Call me back. Ryan looked like I'd slapped him. Divorce? I ended the call. Yes. You're overreacting. No, Ryan, I'm responding. Before he could say anything else, I opened my banking app. A few taps later, his authorized user access disappeared from every card attached to my account. It took less than a minute. Ryan stared at me in disbelief. What are you doing? Giving you exactly what you asked for. You can't just cut me off. I can. How am I supposed to travel? The question hung in the air. Even now, after everything he'd said, that was still his biggest concern. Not the marriage. Not the divorce. The trip. I grabbed my overnight bag from the hallway closet. You wanted space. His voice rose. Not like this. I walked toward the front door. Then I stopped long enough to look back at him one last time. For the first time all evening, Ryan looked like a man who had just realized the conversation wasn't going the way he'd imagined. Ryan finally looked worried. Unfortunately for him, that realization had arrived about 30 minutes too late. Funny, I said quietly. This is exactly what space looks like. Then I walked out. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, but I kept moving. The rain had gotten heavier by the time I reached my car. As I pulled away from the house, I thought the hardest part was over. I had no idea that 5 days later, Ryan would be standing in an airport terminal staring at a declined credit card, finally realizing that his grand plan to find himself had just cost him everything. The first voicemail arrived less than an hour after I left the house. By midnight, there were 11. When I woke up Friday morning, there were 18. Ryan called from his phone, from blocked numbers, and eventually from numbers I didn't recognize. He left messages ranging from angry to apologetic, sometimes within minutes of each other. One voicemail accused me of destroying our marriage. The next insisted we needed to communicate like adults. A few hours later, he was promising we could work through this together. I deleted every one of them. By then, I'd already realized something important. Ryan wasn't trying to understand why I was hurt. He was trying to convince me that I shouldn't be. Jennifer returned my call Friday morning. After listening to the entire story, she spent several seconds in complete disbelief. Let me make sure I have this right, she said. Your husband announced he wanted a 1-year break from being married, planned international travel, expected you to remain committed to him, and intended to fund the trip using your accounts? That's the short version. Jennifer laughed. Not because it was funny, because she sounded genuinely stunned. And he expected you to agree? Apparently. The divorce paperwork was prepared that same afternoon. Ryan was officially served the following day. That's when the panic started. Real panic. Not the confident certainty he'd shown at the dinner table. Not the excitement he'd had while describing Greece and Italy. The panic of someone discovering that a decision he thought was theoretical had suddenly become very real. By Sunday morning, my phone showed 23 voicemails. I counted them before deleting them. Not one sounded worth hearing. 5 days after our dinner conversation, Ryan's departure day finally arrived. At 6:47 a.m., my phone rang from an unknown number. For some reason, I answered. The second I heard his voice, I knew exactly where he was. Claire. He sounded breathless, tense. I need your help. I sat up in bed. Good morning to you, too. My card isn't working. For a moment, I thought he was talking about a banking error. Then reality caught up. He was at the airport he'd planned to leave from. The airport he'd expected to launch his new life from. My card got declined. I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the background, I could hear airport announcements. Rolling suitcases. Voices. Crowds. Ryan lowered his voice. My flight leaves in less than an hour. That's unfortunate. Claire, this isn't funny. I didn't say it was. Call the bank. No. His breathing immediately changed. What do you mean, no? I mean exactly what I said. You need to fix this. His voice had changed completely. The certainty from our dinner conversation had been replaced by panic. Ryan, those cards worked because I allowed them to. You can't leave me stranded. That word almost made me laugh. Stranded. As though a grown man with a passport and functioning legs had somehow become a victim of natural disaster. You're not stranded. Then what am I? A traveler who can't afford his trip. That earned me several seconds of silence before he spoke again. You don't understand. The irony nearly made me smile. For weeks, he'd apparently been planning a new life. Now he was standing in an airport asking me to rescue the old one. No, Ryan, you don't understand. His voice sharpened. What is that supposed to mean? It means you spent months planning a year away from your marriage and somehow convinced yourself I'd still be standing exactly where you left me. I'm not leaving you. You already did. Airport noise filled the line again. Then he said the sentence that finally explained everything. I didn't think you'd actually do this. There it was, the assumption underneath the entire plan. He never believed I'd take him seriously. He thought I'd argue, cry, negotiate, maybe even agree after enough discussion. What he never expected was acceptance. And acceptance was exactly what made the whole thing collapse. Have a good trip, Ryan. I ended the call, blocked the number, then rolled over and went back to sleep. A few hours later, I learned what happened next. Ryan tried 3 different cards. Every one of them was declined. He missed the flight. His best friend eventually picked him up from the airport. The self-discovery tour ended before it even began. That afternoon, someone else called me. A woman, one of Ryan's friends. I didn't recognize the number, so I answered. The conversation started aggressively. What is wrong with you? I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it. Interesting introduction. I'm sorry? You humiliated him. Now I understood. Ryan had started recruiting supporters. Who is this? You know who this is. Actually, I didn't. Ryan had enough friends that keeping track became impossible years ago. The woman continued. Ryan is devastated. My husband planned a year-long break from our marriage. That's not what happened. I sat down on the couch. Then tell me what happened. He needed space. Okay. He needed time. Okay. He needed to figure things out. Okay. She sounded increasingly frustrated. You keep agreeing with me. Because I do agree. That caught her off guard. She paused before asking the question she should have started with. Then why are you divorcing him? Because that was the part everyone kept skipping. Ryan's friends wanted to treat his decision like a temporary emotional crisis. Not what it actually was. A deliberate choice. Months of planning. Flights, budgets, destinations, expectations. If someone tells you they want a year away from being your spouse, I said, it's usually smart to believe them. He still loves you. He expected me to stay home while he traveled the world. That's not abandonment. He packed luggage. The woman didn't answer, so I kept going. He wanted all the benefits of marriage while temporarily opting out of the responsibilities. When she finally hung up, it wasn't because I'd convinced her. It was because she had run out of arguments. The following Wednesday, Jennifer called with another update. Ryan had hired an attorney. That part wasn't surprising. The next part was, his lawyer wants to discuss reconciliation. I laughed. Already? Apparently reality has been educational. Jennifer's tone turned dry. There's something else. I sat up straighter. What? Ryan is claiming financial abandonment. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Then I realized I hadn't. The man who planned to spend a year exploring Europe using my accounts was now claiming I had abandoned him financially. Jennifer sounded almost amused. He also wants temporary spousal support. I nearly dropped my coffee. You're joking. I wish I was. How much? $1,500 a month. I stared at the wall. Ryan wanted me to finance his year-long vacation. Now he wanted me to finance his divorce too. Jennifer waited for my reaction. Eventually, I shook my head. This is insane. It gets better. Somehow that sentence made me nervous. Jennifer continued. Do you still have the texts? The travel plans? Everything. I opened my phone. Every message was still there. Every itinerary. Every country. Every estimate. Every excited discussion about places he planned to visit while I stayed home waiting. I have all of it. Good. I could practically hear her smiling. Send everything. An hour later, I'd forwarded nearly 60 screenshots. The entire timeline. Every plan. Every destination. Every message proving Ryan hadn't been confused. He'd been organized. Very organized. That evening, Jennifer called back. After reviewing everything, her confidence had become impossible to miss. Claire? Yeah? I think your husband just built our case for us. I looked out the window as the sun disappeared behind the houses across the street. Something told me Ryan still believed he could talk his way out of this. What he didn't realize was that the biggest witness against him wasn't me. It was his own phone. And very soon, a judge was going to read every word he'd written. Jennifer wasn't exaggerating. The moment she reviewed Ryan's messages, she stopped treating the case like a complicated divorce and started treating it like a paperwork problem. Every text told the same story. Ryan hadn't been confused. He hadn't been pressured. He hadn't made an emotional decision in a single bad moment. He had spent months planning a year-long escape from his marriage. The screenshots showed travel routes, budget estimates, hostel recommendations, packing lists, flight options, even notes about places he wanted to visit once he was finally free to discover himself. By the time Jennifer finished reading everything, she sounded almost cheerful. Honestly, Claire, I've seen people sabotage themselves before, but your husband documented the entire thing for us. That turned out to be useful a few days later when another familiar voice entered the situation. Ryan's mother. I still have no idea how she got my number. One afternoon, my phone rang and I saw an unfamiliar number. The moment I answered, I recognized her voice. Claire? Hi, Evelyn. She skipped the small talk entirely. You're tearing this family apart. I looked out the living room window. Across the street, a man was teaching his daughter how to ride a bike. The scene felt strangely peaceful compared to the conversation I was having. Evelyn, your son announced he wanted a year-long break from our marriage. He made a mistake. Maybe. Then forgive him. I can forgive him and still divorce him. That answer seemed to catch her off guard. For several seconds, she searched for a response. Finally, she said, He's devastated. I believed her. Ryan probably was devastated. Just not for the reasons people assumed. He wasn't devastated when he researched flights. He wasn't devastated when he planned 12 months abroad. He wasn't devastated while explaining why I should wait for him. The devastation arrived when reality showed up, when the cards stopped working, when the divorce papers arrived, when he realized his plan wasn't going to happen. Evelyn's voice softened. He's scared. That part sounded more honest. Because fear explained everything. Fear explained the attorney. Fear explained the sudden reconciliation attempts. Fear explained why the man who wanted freedom now wanted his marriage back. What is he supposed to do? She asked. The same thing every independent adult does. What? He gets a job. The line went quiet. Not because she disagreed, because she knew I was right. A few days later, I returned to the house to collect more of my things. Ryan's car was already in the driveway. The second I walked inside, I knew he'd been waiting. He appeared from the kitchen, looking noticeably different than he had the week before. Ryan looked exhausted, like the airport disaster had finally caught up with him. Like someone who hadn't slept much since the airport. Claire. His voice sounded careful. I need 5 minutes. No, please. I started walking toward the bedroom. He followed. Just hear me out. I stopped. Not because I wanted to save the marriage. Because I wanted closure. Real closure. I turned around. 5 minutes. Ryan nodded immediately. Thank you. Then he took a breath. I didn't think it would end like this. I said nothing. I got caught up in all this self-discovery stuff. Vanessa kept talking about growth and independence and finding purpose. So this is her fault? No. He rubbed the back of his neck. No, it's mine. That answer surprised me. For the first time since this started, he sounded honest. I don't want a gap year anymore. A short laugh escaped before I could stop it. Of course you don't. His shoulders dropped. Claire, you wanted it when you booked flights. I know. You wanted it when you planned Europe. I know. You wanted it when you expected me to finance everything. His eyes dropped to the floor. Because there wasn't a response to that. The facts were too obvious. Eventually, he looked back up. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I studied him for a moment. The strange thing was that I believed he meant it, at least partly. But wanting to fix something after you've broken it isn't the same thing as protecting it before it breaks. I asked a question that had been sitting in my head since the airport. If I had agreed. Ryan frowned. What? If I'd agreed to wait a year. He already looked uncomfortable. If I'd agreed to fund the trip. His expression tightened. If your card still worked and none of this happened, would you be standing here asking me to save our marriage? Ryan looked away. That answer was enough. I didn't need words. People reveal more through hesitation than they realize. After a while, he quietly said, I love you. The sad part was that I believed him. Ryan probably did love me. Whether Ryan loved me wasn't really the issue anymore. The problem was that I no longer trusted him enough to build a future together. And somewhere between his travel plans and his airport meltdown, those things had disappeared. You planned an entire year without me. His eyes narrowed slightly. I wasn't replacing you. I looked at him for a second. Exactly. His expression tightened. You expected me to stay exactly where I was until you decided you were ready to come back. He looked confused. I continued. You weren't ending the marriage. You were putting me on a shelf until you felt ready to come back. The words landed hard. I could see it in his face. Because that's exactly what he'd expected. A wife waiting patiently at home while he went searching for himself. Eventually, he sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where this entire disaster started. What am I supposed to do now? For the first time, he sounded less like an angry husband and more like someone confronting the consequences of his own decisions. Then he asked a question that told me he still hadn't fully understood the situation. What about the house? I looked at him. The house? I live here. I took a slow breath. Then explained something he should have already known. The house was mine before we got married. His expression changed immediately. It's still in my name. The color slowly drained from his face. There was never a title change. For several seconds, he just stared at me. Then came the realization. The house wasn't part of some shared future anymore. The marriage was ending, and the life he'd assumed would always be there was disappearing with it. You want me to move out? My attorney and your attorney will discuss timelines. He looked genuinely frightened. Not angry, not defensive. Frightened. I don't have anywhere to go. For a moment, I saw flashes of the man I'd married. The man who used to make me laugh. The man who used to stay up with me when I couldn't sleep. The man who once drove through a snowstorm because my car had broken down. That version of Ryan existed, but he wasn't the man standing in front of me anymore. The man standing in front of me had chosen a fantasy over a marriage and assumed everything would still be waiting when he came back. I don't hate you, Ryan. His eyes lifted. Then why are you doing this? Because I'd finally reached the answer. Not the emotional answer. The honest one. If I stay, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering when you'll decide to leave again. Ryan lowered his head. Because he knew exactly what I meant. And deep down, he knew I'd never fully trust him again. When I finished gathering my things and headed toward the door, he followed. Neither of us said much. Then just before I left, he quietly said, I miss you. The words sounded real. Painfully real. Maybe losing something finally showed him its value. Unfortunately, recognition arrives too late more often than people realize. I know. He swallowed. Do you miss me? I thought about it for a second, then told him the truth. I miss who I thought you were. Ryan looked like the air had been knocked out of him. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The afternoon sun hit my face. Behind me, the door closed softly. No shouting. No dramatic scene. Just the sound of something ending. A few days later, the court date arrived. And Ryan was about to discover that the person who would do the most damage to his case wasn't me. It was the version of himself preserved in his own messages. The hearing lasted less than 30 minutes. After weeks of phone calls, accusations, guilt trips, and endless attempts to rewrite what had happened, I expected something bigger. A drawn-out battle. A dramatic courtroom showdown. Instead, the entire thing unraveled faster than I imagined. Jennifer and I arrived early. Ryan was already there with his attorney. His mother sat beside him near the back of the courtroom, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. When Ryan noticed me walk in, he looked away almost immediately. That alone told me more than anything he could have said. A month earlier, he'd been confidently explaining why he deserved a year of freedom. Now he looked like a man hoping reality would somehow reverse itself. The hearing began. Ryan's attorney spoke first. She painted a sympathetic picture. Ryan was emotionally vulnerable. Ryan was financially dependent. Ryan had been abandoned without warning. Ryan was struggling to rebuild his life after an unexpected separation. If someone had walked into the courtroom without knowing the facts, they probably would have felt sorry for him. Then the judge asked a simple question. What led to the separation? Ryan's attorney hesitated. My client requested some personal space. The judge nodded. What kind of personal space? A temporary separation. How temporary? The attorney glanced toward Ryan. Approximately 1 year. The judge slowly raised an eyebrow. 1 year? Yes, Your Honor. I watched Jennifer make a note on her pad. The hearing had barely started, and Ryan's case was already developing cracks. The judge folded his hands. And what was the purpose of this separation? My client wanted time for personal growth. The judge nodded again before turning toward Jennifer. Counsel? Jennifer stood, calm, prepared, completely unfazed. Your Honor, we have documentation regarding the separation request. She handed over a folder. Inside were the screenshots, the travel plans, the itineraries, the budget estimates, every message Ryan had sent. The judge spent several minutes reading. The courtroom became noticeably quieter as page after page revealed exactly how much planning had gone into Ryan's so-called confusion. Finally, the judge looked up. Mr. Bennett. Ryan straightened in his chair. Yes, Your Honor. You informed your wife that you intended to spend approximately 12 months traveling internationally. Yes. You expected to remain married during that period. Ryan swallowed. Yes. You expected her to wait for you. His attorney looked uncomfortable. Ryan looked worse. But eventually he answered. Yes. The judge glanced back down at the documents. And according to these messages, you expected much of this travel to be funded through accounts associated with your wife. Ryan shifted in his seat. It wasn't exactly... Mr. Bennett. The judge interrupted him. His voice wasn't angry. It didn't need to be. Is that statement accurate? Ryan stared at the table, then nodded. Yes. The judge leaned back. For a few moments, he simply studied the paperwork. When he finally spoke again, every word landed exactly where it needed to. You requested a 1-year suspension of marital responsibilities while expecting the benefits of the marriage to continue. Ryan's attorney attempted to intervene. Your Honor, my client was experiencing emotional difficulties. I don't doubt that. The judge's response came immediately. Then he looked down at one of the travel itineraries. Greece, another page. Italy, another. Spain, another. Thailand, another. Nepal. A few people in the courtroom shifted in their seats. The judge looked back at Ryan. This appears less like confusion and more like extensive planning. Jennifer lowered her eyes to hide a smile. Even Ryan's attorney looked like she wanted to disappear. The judge closed the folder. Your wife did not abandon you. Ryan stared straight ahead. You informed her that you intended to step away from the marriage for a year. The judge paused. She responded by filing for divorce. Another pause. That response was entirely predictable. Ryan visibly flinched, as if the judge had just said something he'd spent weeks trying not to admit. Like someone hearing a truth they'd spent weeks trying to avoid. His attorney made one final attempt. My client needs financial support while these proceedings continue. The judge glanced toward Ryan. Mr. Bennett appears healthy. Then toward the attorney. He is 36 years old. Then back toward the documents. And fully capable of employment. The ruling came seconds later. Temporary support is denied. Just like that, it was over. Ryan sat motionless. His mother looked devastated. His attorney quietly gathered her papers. Jennifer leaned toward me. Told you. I smiled. She had. Outside the courthouse, Ryan caught up with me before I reached the parking lot. Claire. I stopped. Mostly because I was tired. Tired of lawyers. Tired of explanations. Tired of hearing the same arguments dressed up in different words. Ryan looked exhausted. More exhausted than I'd ever seen him. This isn't what I wanted. I studied him for a moment, then shook my head. Actually, it is. His jaw tightened. No, you wanted freedom. Not like this. There wasn't another version of this. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it, because there wasn't a response. The problem wasn't that he wanted something different. The problem was that he'd convinced himself he could have everything at once. Ryan had convinced himself he could leave for a year and return to the exact same marriage whenever he felt ready. Life rarely works that way. Before leaving, he tried one last time. We could still fix this. I looked at him carefully. A few weeks earlier, that sentence might have hurt. Now it just felt late. Painfully late. You should have wanted to fix it before you booked the flights. His shoulders dropped. I got into my car and drove away. The next stage of the divorce moved much faster than anyone expected. With temporary support denied, settlement negotiations began almost immediately. And that's where things became even more ridiculous. Because after losing in court, Ryan apparently decided to aim higher. Much higher. A week later, Jennifer called me laughing. Not smiling. Actually laughing. You're not going to believe this. I already knew I wasn't going to like whatever came next. What happened? Ryan's settlement proposal arrived. I leaned back in my chair. How bad is it? Jennifer took a breath, then started reading. And with every line, I became more convinced that Ryan still hadn't learned a thing. When Jennifer said she was laughing, I assumed she was exaggerating. She wasn't. The moment she started reading Ryan's settlement proposal, I understood why. Ready? She asked. Probably not. Ryan is requesting permanent spousal support. I closed my eyes. Of course he was. How much? $2,500 a month. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the alternative was asking whether he'd suffered a head injury. Jennifer continued. He wants 50% of your retirement accounts. Of course. He wants a $50,000 cash settlement. I stared at the ceiling. For what? According to the proposal, his contributions to the marriage. That one nearly broke me. For years, I'd paid the mortgage. I'd funded his photography phase, his yoga certification, his endless hobbies, his personal growth adventures. And now he wanted a reward package on the way out. Jennifer wasn't finished. He wants most of the furniture. Naturally. And he wants you to pay for his health insurance for 2 years. I burst out laughing. A long, uncontrollable laugh that left me wiping tears from my eyes. The entire proposal sounded less like a legal document and more like a Christmas wish list. What was your response? Jennifer didn't miss a beat. Zero spousal support, standard division. Each party keeps their own vehicle, furniture split, everyone pays their own bills. Reasonable. I thought so. Ryan apparently disagreed. According to his attorney, he felt deeply disrespected by our offer. Jennifer relayed that message with the same enthusiasm someone might use when discussing weather forecasts. My heart bleeds. The funny part was that Ryan's attorney eventually called back. Not the next day. Not 2 days later. 68 hours later. Just 4 hours before our deadline expired. Ryan accepted. Because despite everything, he finally understood what Jennifer already knew. A courtroom wasn't likely to be more generous than reality. While negotiations were happening, another problem surfaced. Ryan had started talking. A lot. To friends. Mutual friends. Former neighbors. Anyone willing to listen. According to Ryan's version of events, I had financially abused him. Controlled him. Manipulated him. Abandoned him. Apparently, I'd become a villain while he became a victim. A few people believed him. 3 couples we used to spend time with sent messages expressing disappointment in how I'd handled the divorce. One even suggested I should have been more compassionate. So I sent screenshots. Not dozens. Just enough. The dinner conversation. The travel plans. The itinerary. The expectation that I'd fund everything. That ended most of the debate. 2 of the 3 couples apologized within 24 hours. The third blocked me. I considered it a problem solving itself. Then something unexpected happened. Ryan's sister called. Lauren and I had never been particularly close. We got along. We were polite, but we weren't the kind of people who talked regularly. That's why I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. Claire? Hi, Lauren. Her voice sounded hesitant, almost embarrassed. Is it true? I knew immediately what she meant. What part? The gap year. I leaned back in my chair. So he didn't tell you? Lauren laughed. A short, frustrated laugh. No, he told everyone you threw him out for no reason. That sounded about right. I spent the next 10 minutes explaining what actually happened. The flights, the plans, the year abroad, the airport, the court hearing. When I finished, Lauren was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. Oh my God. What? Of course you divorced him. That wasn't the response I'd expected. Lauren continued. You know this isn't the first time he's done something like this, right? I sat up straighter. What do you mean? And then pieces of Ryan's history started falling into place. Lauren started listing projects Ryan had abandoned over the years. By the third example, I realized the gap year wasn't some sudden midlife crisis. It was the same pattern wearing a different outfit. The business ideas that lasted a month before being replaced by another business idea. Lauren had watched the pattern for years. She sounded exhausted just talking about it. He always falls in love with the fantasy. The sentence stuck with me because it explained everything. The gap year, the life coach, the travel plans, the sudden obsession with finding himself. Ryan loved the excitement that came with new beginnings. What he struggled with was commitment. Following through after the excitement faded. Lauren sighed again. You know our mom paid $8,000 for his photography idea? I blinked. What? He convinced her it would become a business. What happened? What always happens? I didn't need her to explain. For the first time since this entire disaster started, I wasn't hearing from Ryan's defenders. I was hearing from someone who knew him. Someone who'd seen the same cycle repeat over and over. Before hanging up, Lauren said something that stayed with me. You didn't ruin his life, Claire. I stared out the window. No? No. Her voice was firm. He finally ran into a situation where somebody said no. After the call ended, I sat there thinking about that. Maybe that was why Ryan struggled so much. For years, people had rescued him, supported him, funded him, excused him, protected him from his own decisions. Then he met a decision nobody could undo. 3 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Jennifer said it was unusually fast. I wasn't surprised. There wasn't much left to argue about. Ryan received a small percentage of the marital portion of my retirement account, half of the joint savings. His car, half the furniture, no spousal support, no insurance, no cash payout, no financial rescue package. The day everything became official, I expected to feel emotional. Instead, I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying something heavy for years without realizing it. Then life moved forward. Ryan moved into a small studio apartment. He got a retail job. His mother started helping him with rent. The life coach disappeared from the picture entirely. According to Lauren, Ryan blamed Vanessa for everything, which was ironic. She didn't book the flights. She didn't write the travel plans. She didn't ask for a year away from the marriage. Ryan did. Several weeks later, I ran into him unexpectedly. And that encounter would become the final chapter of a story both of us were finally ready to leave behind. I hadn't seen Ryan in almost 2 months when I ran into him at a coffee shop on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I was finishing some work and waiting for a drink when I noticed a familiar figure near the front window. For a second, I didn't recognize him. The man sitting by the window looked older than I remembered. He was sitting across from another man, someone I didn't know. They appeared to be discussing work. Papers were spread across the table between them. The moment Ryan looked up and saw me, his entire expression changed. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes widened. Then he immediately looked away. I almost smiled. Not out of cruelty, just because it felt strange. For months he'd been chasing me, calling, texting, trying to explain himself. Now that we were standing in the same room, he suddenly looked like he wished he were somewhere else. I ordered my coffee and found a table near the opposite side of the cafe. Part of me expected him to ignore me. Instead, 10 minutes later, he approached. Slowly, carefully, like someone walking toward a conversation they already knew wouldn't go well. Claire. I looked up. Hi, Ryan. He shifted awkwardly. You look good. I couldn't remember the last time we'd spoken without lawyers involved. You too. The lie hung in the air between us. We both knew it wasn't true. Ryan gave a short laugh. I look exhausted. Then maybe that's true. For the first time in months, he smiled. A real smile. Small, tired, but genuine. He glanced toward the man waiting at his table. My manager. I nodded. How's work? The question seemed to surprise him. Maybe because it sounded normal. Maybe because normal conversations between us no longer existed. It's okay. Just okay. Not exciting. Not inspiring. Not life-changing. Just work. The kind of work millions of adults do every day. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Ryan looked down at the floor. I've thought about that night a lot. I already knew which night he meant. The dinner. The conversation. The beginning of the end. I imagine you have. He nodded. I keep replaying it. There was something different about him now. Months earlier, every conversation had contained an excuse, a justification, a defense. Now he simply sounded tired. I really believed I knew what I was doing. I know. I thought I was chasing something important. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. And, Ryan laughed quietly. A sad laugh. The funny part is I can't even explain what I was chasing anymore. That answer felt more honest than anything he'd said during the divorce. Because people often become obsessed with an idea long before they understand it. And by the time reality catches up, the fantasy has already disappeared. Ryan glanced out the window. I lost everything. I thought about correcting him, but I didn't. Because from his perspective, he probably had. The marriage. The house. The future he'd assumed would always be waiting for him. All gone. Then he looked back at me. I was angry at you for a long time. That surprised me. Really? He nodded. I told myself you overreacted. I stayed quiet. Ryan shook his head. Then I started reading our messages again. A faint smile crossed my face. The same messages that destroyed your court case? Yeah, he laughed. This time the laugh sounded genuine. Those messages. His smile disappeared. The more I read them, the worse I looked. I couldn't argue with that, because he was right. Months earlier, he'd sounded entitled. Certain. Completely convinced his plan made sense. Distance has a way of making people hear themselves differently. Neither could I. For the first time, Ryan wasn't trying to justify what he'd done. He was finally looking at it the way everyone else had from the beginning. Eventually, he took a breath. Ryan stared into his coffee for a few seconds. Then he shook his head. I expected you to wait. A tired laugh escaped him. I still can't believe I thought that was reasonable. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The noise of the cafe filled the space instead. Coffee grinders. Conversations. Music playing softly overhead. Normal life. Eventually, Ryan smiled. A tired but peaceful smile. I guess I finally figured out what everyone was trying to tell me. I raised an eyebrow. And what's that? You don't get to put people on hold. The answer landed harder than he probably realized. Because that was exactly what this entire story had been about. Not travel. Not Europe. Not self-discovery. Not life coaching. A man believing someone would remain exactly how and where he left them while he chased a different version of life. Ryan glanced toward his manager again. I should get back. Probably. He hesitated, then extended his hand. Not for reconciliation. Not for another chance. Just a goodbye. I shook it, and that was it. No dramatic ending. No final argument. No emotional speech. Just two people standing in a coffee shop, finally understanding that the story was over. That night, I thought about everything that had happened over the previous few months and realized none of it hurt anymore. Even the endless attempts to rewrite reality no longer bothered me. By then, the weight I'd been carrying for months finally felt lighter. A few weeks later, I started seeing someone casually. Nothing serious. Just dinners, conversations, a few good dates. The biggest surprise wasn't meeting new people. It was realizing how peaceful life had become. My house felt different now. Cleaner, brighter, like it finally belonged to me again. Work was going well. I received a promotion I'd been chasing for over a year. Friends noticed I seemed happier, more relaxed, less distracted. They were right. For years, I'd spent energy carrying someone else's instability. I just hadn't realized it. One evening, my brother asked whether I regretted anything, whether I should have tried harder, given Ryan another chance, been more understanding. I thought about it for a while before answering. Ryan never came to me asking for help. He never came to me saying he was struggling. He never asked us to work on the marriage together. Instead, he announced he was leaving for a year and expected me to remain exactly where he'd left me. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a decision. And once someone makes a decision like that, they shouldn't be surprised when the other person makes one too. The last update I received about Ryan came from Lauren. She said he was doing okay. Lauren said he was working, paying his own bills, and slowly building a life of his own. I was genuinely happy to hear it, because despite everything, I never wanted him to fail. I just stopped being willing to save him from himself. As for me, the divorce paperwork sits in a folder tucked away in a cabinet I rarely open anymore. Every once in a while, I see the label and remember the story. Then I close the drawer and move on with my day. Years later, the lesson I remember most has nothing to do with courtrooms or divorce papers. It's much simpler than that. When someone shows you exactly where you fit in their priorities, believe them the first time. Ryan told me he needed a year away from being my husband. I believed him. And in the end, that decision turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to both of us.